Good morning. It's Wednesday, January 21st. The multi-front war in the Middle East is now 837 days old. I'm your host, Jonathan Schanzer. Welcome back yet again to the FDD Morning Brief. I'm watching a story out of Georgia right now with particular interest. Not the country of Georgia and the Caucasus. No, I'm talking about the state of Georgia, which is home to no less than 447 Waffle House chain restaurants, which adds up to about a quarter of all white Waffle Houses in the country for those keeping track at home. As some of you may know, I went to college in Georgia, and I'm a big fan of Emory University and its undefeated football team. But it turns out that Fatima Larijani, daughter of Ali Larijani, works at the Cancer Research Institute at the university. Ali Larijani, for those of you who don't know, is the secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council. He's a former IRGC officer and a former speaker of the Majlis, which is the Islamic Republic's faux parliament. Lately, Larijani has been the point man for the crackdown on the Iranian protest movement. In other words, he's got a lot of blood on his hands, and Emory is coming under a lot of pressure right now to send his daughter home. The university insists that Fatima is working there legally. I have no doubt that she is, but the optics are not great. We're going to keep watching this story. Stay tuned. And speaking of Iran, today's guest is Emily Schrader, an Israeli-American journalist and a repeat offender on this program. She is, among other things, an Iran watcher. She's a passionate advocate for maximum support to the Iranian people, along with maximum pressure on the regime. This is kind of FDD's thing, right? She founded the Iran-Israel Alliance and serves on the executive council for the Institute for Voices of Liberty, a nonprofit committed to amplifying the dreams and voices of Iranians. So stick around. My conversation with her is coming your way shortly. Let's stick with the Iran theme a little bit more here, folks, because the World Economic Forum is underway in Davos, Switzerland. And just as he was getting ready to join this exclusive event, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi learned that his invitation was revoked. Tehran's bloody crackdown on Iranian protesters was the reason, and Araghchi was irate. In a Monday X post, Araghchi blamed it all on, quote, lies and political pressure from Israel and its U.S.-based proxies and apologists, end quote. I love how he used the word proxies here. Zero self-awareness. Never mind that his regime has slaughtered upwards of 16,500 innocent protesters, maybe more. Never mind that the regime shut down the internet and phone services in the country to hide its crimes. No, Araghchi is upset because he's being deprived of an opportunity to rub elbows with world leaders and to charm them with his purported moderation. To that I say, good. For far too long, we've been hearing about the so-called good guys in Iran, the so-called moderates, and Araghchi is supposed to be among them. This is a fiction, folks. The entire regime is rotten, top to bottom, and it needs to be shunned. The barring of Araghchi is long overdue. It's a template for how the rest of the regime should be treated, like toxic goods. Somehow, Araghchi placed an op-ed today in the Wall Street Journal. The journal is typically hardline on Iran, so that's disappointing. On the other hand, in his article, Araghchi essentially owns the crackdown. That should be helpful when he one day, inshallah, goes on trial for war crimes. Now for your headlines. Headline 1, Israel began demolishing UNRWA's headquarters in East Jerusalem. Yesterday morning, Israeli forces bulldozed their way into the compound and started leveling buildings. This is the same compound that the Israelis raided last month over an ongoing tax dispute. But as we all know, this isn't a tax dispute. This is about terrorist sponsorship. Anyway, the UN isn't active at the site anymore, and there were no UN personnel at the scene when the Israelis arrived, so no personal damage in any way. At this point, UNRWA, the UN Relief and Works Agency, is livid. The UN agency / Hamas front described the move as, quote, an unprecedented attack, end quote, and it accused Israel of violating international law, which is pretty rich. Israel defended the demolition, which is just the latest step to enforce a pair of laws that Israel passed in October of 24, banning UNRWA from operating in Israel, Gaza, and the West Bank. And to all of this, I say, in the immortal words of Lizzo, it's about damn time. One last bastion of Hamas support makes for one good piece of news, and those are not always easy to come by these days. Hurrah. Headline 2, U.S. Ambassador to Turkey Tom Barrack, who also serves as Trump's Syria envoy, thinks that things are going swimmingly in Damascus. You'll recall over the weekend, the Syrian army signed a ceasefire agreement with the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, or SDF, that was supposed to bring SDF-held territory in northeast Syria under government control. Things aren't going exactly as planned. The SDF withdrew from a camp holding thousands of alleged Islamic State affiliates. Some 1,500 ISIS fighters reportedly escaped from a local prison, and there could be more happening right now. Now to Barrack. Check out his X feed. He's basically framing this as an opportunity for all of Syria to come under the control of the regime of Ahmad al-Shara, formerly known as Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, formerly of the Nusra Front. Anyway, it's all framed as a question of stability, but I got to ask, how stable is the country supposed to be with 15 ISIS fighters running around? And let's not pretend that the minorities in Syria are about to enjoy equal rights. A lot of questions lingering in Syria. Headline 3, Israel is still at it in the West Bank. Yesterday, the IDF began a sweeping counterterrorism operation in the West Bank city of Hebron. The goal of the operation is to dismantle terrorist infrastructure, seize weapons, and bolster security overall. They've actually showed some of those weapons. There's a lot going on there. It's been 1 year since Israel launched Operation Iron Wall in the West Bank, and it may not be easy or simple, but Israel's efforts appear to be paying off. The IDF published statistics this week showing a 78% drop in West Bank terror incidents in 2025 compared to 2024, and an 85% decrease in terrorist attacks with firearms. Over the last year, Israeli forces have shut down 17 weapons manufacturing sites in the West Bank, and it's confiscated nearly 1,400 weapons, components during dozens of brigade-level operations. I got to say, I'm not happy. I'm not sanguine about Iran's inroads in the West Bank, but I do think that whatever the IDF is doing, it seems to be working well enough. So keep up the good work, fellas. We're going to keep tracking. All right, it's back to Iran where it needs to be. So let's bring Emily Schrader onto the show. Welcome to the FDD Morning Brief, Emily Schrader.
Glad to be here.
Good to have you, you repeat offender. All right, let's get this going. I want to just talk right now about where we are with the protests, just by the numbers, right? There's some pretty gruesome numbers. I've seen somewhere like 3,600 or 4,000 dead, which is shocking. But then I've seen reports of 12,000, 16,000, 20,000. I've been hearing about hundreds of operations where they're removing eyeballs because the regime is actually, that's what they're shooting for. I'm hearing about tens of thousands of arrests. I'm hearing about tens of thousands of injuries. What are the numbers as you understand? What are the best numbers for us to work with?
So first and foremost, we don't really know because the internet is shut down. And not only that, but even when it's back, if it comes back, which we'll get to later, they're hiding everything that they can. They're doing everything that they can to cover their tracks. That's very, very obvious. It's one of the reasons that they shut off the internet. But from the reports that have been compiled so far, I think one of the more recent and most credible that we've seen so far was the Sunday Times, because they compiled from at least 6 different hospitals. They spoke to multiple doctors, multiple clinics, not just hospitals, as well as multiple interviews on the ground of people who were there, eyewitnesses. And what they came up with was anywhere between 16,500 up to 18,000 confirmed dead, killed in these protests, 300,000, I believe it was 330,000 injured, tens of thousands arrested. I don't remember the exact number. And that's pretty across the board. Everyone is reporting tens of thousands have been arrested. Iran International said that it was a minimum of 12,000 based on their sources and reporting that they've heard from similar figures, doctors, nurses, other people who were on the ground witnessing some of what happened. But I do have to say that everyone I have spoken to who is operating on Starlink, that I've been able to be in contact with inside of Iran, has said that even that 16,000 figure is way too low, that it's going to be in the tens of thousands, significantly higher. And if we don't ever get that number confirmed, the most likely scenario is that it's because they're covering it up.
Yeah, and we know they are. And of course, they're blaming foreign influence. They're saying it's the Israelis or that it's the United States.
Which is highly ironic considering the fact that they've been bringing in at least 5,000 Iraqi proxy terror militias to murder their own citizens. But sure, right. Foreign intervention.
Right. And you know, there, I think it's important to understand that the Artesh, the army, the Basij, they're apparently more reticent, I suppose, to mow down Iranians on the streets. And so they're bringing in these outsiders, and people are talking about how they're hearing Arabic being spoken on the streets as these crackdowns occur. So yeah, the whole idea of blaming proxies is hilarious and sad and depressing because, of course, they've been using proxies all across the Middle East, and now they're using proxies at home. All right, I want to get an update on the communications crackdown. We know that they're using some kind of military-grade technology, probably Russian, to jam the internet, to jam Starlink, to jam the phone lines. And so we've got like a near blackout. We are still seeing some video and images that are still getting through, but they're far fewer than we'd like to see. I think we're missing the full picture. But anyway, give us kind of a sense of what's going on there.
So we now are at more than well over now 300 hours of a complete communications blackout. That's phone and internet. All of the internet service providers have been cut off. In addition to that, they have been using military grade jammers. There were some reports it was Chinese, some that it was Russian. What's certain is it came from somewhere and somebody's helping them shut down the Starlink signals. And we are getting some footage, as you mentioned, but we're getting it very slowly. The footage that I'm receiving, even from contacts I have, is from 3-4 days ago, which it's still important that it gets out, but it's not getting out in real time. So there is a delay in terms of what we know is happening on the ground as a result of that. And I think one of the most scary things that I've seen just in the past 48 hours is that they've started to return internet to certain people. So you'll see people who have what's referred to there as white SIM cards. They're government approved users, people who are allowed to use the internet. One of the most prominent we've seen in the past week is Mohammed Marandi, the professor who is a shill for the Islamic Republic. And, you know, he was doing interviews with the Western media, Christiane Amanpour from Iran, while the internet was cut off, which should tell you something. They are pushing a specific narrative, attempting to whitewash what they have already done in terms of massacring their own people in the streets. And that is why we should be concerned right now, because in a way, limited access is almost worse than no access at all, because then the only message that's coming from Iran is the one that the Islamic regime itself wants to promote. And that's what we've started to see just in the past few days, more and more rhetoric on social media, in mainstream Western media, about how the regime isn't really to blame, that in fact it's Israel, all of these talking points. And one of the more concerning ones that we've also heard is speaking over the voice of the people, who we've seen consistently be calling for the return of Reza Pahlavi, the crown prince of Iran, across different provinces. We've seen this, even somewhat surprising to me. And yet now we're starting to hear pushback about that from the Iran lobby. A lot of these figures that have worked at the behest of the regime, even unofficially for many years, are now suddenly finding faults in this and saying that's not really what it is, and that's the videos are fake. And they're very much pushing this narrative against him particularly, which that alone should tell people that he's an important figure in this equation right now.
I got to tell you, I mean, you were just kind of hinting at it, or kind of walking, tiptoeing around it, maybe not even tiptoeing, but I mean, first of all, Christiane Amanpour, disgusting. I mean, the numbers of interviews that she's done with the regime that would seem to normalize their brutality, and to give them voice at a time like this, it is truly nauseating. And then we have the whole kind of Iran lobby ecosystem here in Washington, the people that for years have been talking about the so-called moderates, and the people that we should be empowering at the expense of the hardliners. What this has done, and it's laundered the regime over time. And this is not the time to be doing that, if you ask me. This is the moment to be supporting the people of Iran who want this regime to go down. All right, you mentioned Pahlavi, the crown prince in waiting, the crown prince in exile, the son of the fallen Shah. Look, I want to, I mean, we can talk about the sort of optics of, and maybe we'll do that right after this. But first, there was this cyber attack, and it pumped in pro-Pahlavi messaging. What do we know about, again, we'll leave Pahlavi aside for a second. I want to talk to you about that in a second. But what do we know about this particular cyber attack? Was this carried out by him? Was it carried out by Israel? Was it carried out by the United States? Was it done by an Iranian hacking group? What do we know about this?
So we actually know almost nothing. And even if it was Israel and I knew about it, I probably wouldn't be able to say. But I genuinely don't think that it was Israel. I do think it was Iranian hackers. I don't think it was him at all. One of the interesting characteristics about Reza Pahlavi, and I say this as someone who has interviewed him multiple times and also have met with him beyond just interviews, I he's not someone who's very power hungry. This isn't someone who is in it for himself. I believe this is someone who genuinely has a heart for his people, for the people of Iran, and believes that he can oversee a change that would be positive for everyone involved. One really interesting thing about it, though, is that he's not actually a hard monarchist himself. He spent much of his life in the United States. He supports democracy, and he wants to see a democratic transition in Iran. He only wants to be in charge of, for lack of a better term, the transition after the Islamic Republic. And then, depending on what the people choose in Iran based on a national referendum, that's what he's advocating for. At most, a constitutional monarchy, which I think would be a great thing and is very, very much in line with what we're hearing from Iranians on the ground. One more interesting thing about Pahlavi is that even sources I have, who I spoke to several years ago about Pahlavi, who were kind of on the fence and weren't sure, and oh, well, I don't know if I really like him because I didn't really like the Shah. And there was a lot of that sentiment. Now, nothing. I haven't spoken to a single person on the ground, a liberal, a Democrat, whatever they define themselves as. Everyone wants Pahlavi back. I think because they understand that they have to get behind a united opposition leader. And this actually relates to what we were just saying about moderates. We cannot trust anyone who's inside Iran right now. The people who the regime continues to present as moderates, like Javad Zarif, or any of these people that the regime has presented as somehow being reformable, are not people that anyone should trust. Certainly, the Iranian people do not. These are people with blood on their hands. They're not people that could oversee a democrat, much less democratic transition from the Islamic Republic into anything positive. And that's something we need to be very wary of, and that Western countries need to be paying close attention to, especially now as we start to see this regime's propaganda efforts push forward, now that they're allowing internet, of course, for only themselves and their pro-regime propagandists. If it's something that's coming from those people, it's a pretty safe bet that it's not representative of what the people of Iran are calling for.
I absolutely agree. I want to just have you explain one thing, though. I mean, I understand the idea that Pahlavi could be the guy that brings constitutional monarchy, and we all know that's sort of the British model, and that doesn't mean that it's anti-democratic just because you have a monarch. However, the dialogue, the debate within the Iranian expat community, within the Iranian community, even on the ground, they're not really talking about it in that way. Right? The nuance of it is lost. People are just calling him their king, right? What does that mean for the United States? What does that mean for Israel? Countries that are, devout democracies, right? Should we be still giving this man voice? Should we be concerned about this movement? Or is the idea to let the perfect get in the way of the good, get past this regime, and then figure out what happens next? I mean, I'm just trying to game this out because there are a lot of people out there who are pushing back and saying, why are we pushing for a monarchy? Why are we pushing for one man rule? Don't we already have that in Iran? So maybe help us understand the nuance of this.
So there's a few things that are important to understand from the perspective of the West. The first is that Reza Pahlavi himself is not advocating monarchy. We need to pay attention to what he actually is saying and what his record is as well, not just right now. His entire life, he has not advocated for a straight monarchy. Yes, there are some supporters who that is what they want. But you know what? Frankly, when it comes to the United States or other Western democracies, who are we to be telling the people of Iran what they choose as their system of government if that is indeed what they choose through a national referendum? That's their decision, not mine and not anyone else's. The second thing that's important to remember is that when it comes to Western democracies, why are we focusing in on Reza Pahlavi and whether or not there will be monarchy or constitutional monarchy or anything else, when there are tons of monarchies all over the world that the United States has fantastic relationships with? Some of them are very stable countries. One of, the Trump administration's closest allies, Qatar, or the UAE, or any of the other Gulf countries, these are monarchies. So why is it that monarchy is good enough for those people, but not good enough for 90 million people in Iran when that is what they're calling for in the streets, if that is indeed what they choose through a national referendum, which is what this supposed or, future potential monarch himself is advocating for.
Hmm.
If there was a monarch in Qatar that was saying, I want to oversee a transition to democracy, people wouldn't even be having this conversation. But because it involves that step of removing the Islamic Republic of Iran, people are looking for excuses. They're looking for easy ways out, easy ways to criticize what the opposition is. And I think that that's kind of a cheap shot, especially when you're looking at his record and what he himself actually advocates for.
All right. Well, don't expect consistency from the chattering classes in the media. Come on. All right. Trump, Bibi, there's some stuff going on right now I don't fully understand, right? Trump had apparently planes in the air. He was going to attack Iran. He still might attack Iran. Bibi, according to some, asked him to postpone the attack. What do we know?
So I don't believe for a second that Prime Minister Netanyahu asked Trump to delay the attack, at least the way it was presented. It was initially reported in New York Times, sourcing a U.S. official. No Israeli officials have commented this. And in fact, I reached out to the Prime Minister's office to ask them for confirmation. They didn't answer. However, when I asked them if there was any Israeli official that had confirmed this, they did say no.
Hmm.
So that alone should tell you something. More likely, they expressed concern about the scale of the proposed, attack by the United States, and said that it wasn't big enough, or that it wasn't enough possibly to actually bring down the regime, which then could put Israel in a potential bad situation in the long term, meaning that if Israel does have to fight with the Islamic Republic for an extended period of time, there could be barriers to that in terms of our missile defense capabilities and the amount of interceptors that we have. But in terms of asking Trump not to strike the Islamic Republic, no way. I wouldn't believe it for a second. I think there's also a lot of disinformation going around. Everybody's trying to push their agenda, their national agenda, when it comes to how these things are being reported. Certainly, we know that Qatar is a player in that game. They also have an interest in the Islamic Republic not falling. The primary word to describe that is oil, which I won't get into. But it's very clear what their position is on the Islamic Republic. They believe it's better to contain. Whereas for the rest of the region and the rest of pretty much the entire world, especially the Iranian people, the obvious answer is the Islamic Republic needs to fall, and they need to be held accountable for all these crimes against humanity that they've committed.
Yeah. Okay. I want to ask you one more question before I let you go. The Iranian people, they thought help was on the way. It's not, at least right now. Maybe it still is. What is next for them after this sort of letdown? It's after a series of letdowns. What do we expect?
A lot of Iranians that I've spoken to are very upset, understandably so. I think that when you're the president of the United States and you tell people in Iran to take to the streets and take over institutions, that's not just words. You are the most powerful man in the world with the most powerful military in the world. And at the same time you did that, people made decisions, life and death decisions, on the basis of thinking that they had that support in a reasonable time frame. Waiting a week and a half to attack, there might be a good reason and it might still happen. And I hope it does. But there are people who have suffered as a result of the timing of this. And I don't think that that's something that's forgivable. Now, I do hope that he still does the right thing and is able to follow through and help the Iranians reclaim their country. But there's no question that these mixed signals already have caused a great deal of damage. And that's something that we should be honest about and speak about. It remains to be seen if he will act or not. I know it's looking more likely today, but it really could go either way at this point. And that's part of Trump's strategy. We've seen him do this before, also in June. The difference now is that people, civilians' lives are on the line. Even teenagers and young people who have taken to the streets and taken risks that they might not otherwise do. Now, if Trump doesn't strike, this isn't going to go away. Iran is forever changed. The society is forever changed by what's happened just in the past couple of weeks. And I do think we're looking at a long term, possibly even an insurgency. I think it's going to be messy. It's going to be bloody. It's going to be difficult. And it's going to be exceptionally long unless President Trump does the right thing and intervenes, which is weird, I know, because we're talking about military action. But at this point, the only way to truly shut down the Islamic Republic of Iran is to have decisive military action followed up with accountability on the part of all the international community. And I mean implementing the sanctions, holding the perpetrators of these massacres accountable, and also going after the money. When we talk about the money, the billions of dollars that's been laundered through Western democratic countries like the UK, like Canada, this is part of dismantling the IRGC. It's not just about Khamenei. It's not just about the mullahs. It's about destroying the entire system, the guardianship of the Islamist jurist, it's called in English. This is something that has to be utterly decimated for Iran to be free and to rebuild as a functioning, contributing member of the international community.
All right. Couldn't have said it better myself. We're going to leave it there. I want to thank you, Emily Schrader, Emily in Tel Aviv, as you call yourself. Thank you for joining us today on the FDD Morning Brief.
Thanks so much.
All right, here's what FDD has on tap for you today. Check out the latest episode of FDD's Foreign Policy, where FDD's Supreme Leader Cliff May is joined by colleagues Ruel Marcorrect and Bahman Ben Talablu to unpack the United States' lack of meaningful support for the people of Iran, despite assurances that help is on the way. Drawing lessons from history, my three colleagues confront the urgent question of where this crisis is headed and what Washington should do next. Well worth a listen. And Jerusalem isn't off the hook yet either. In a forceful piece for Ynet News, FDD Saeed Ghassaminejad and Iran expert Navid Mohebi call on Israel to keep its longstanding promise to actively support the Iranian people when they need it most. This critical moment, they argue, demands that Israel follow through, if not for the sake of the Iranian people, then for Israel's own strategic interests. Finally, my colleagues Elaine Dezensky and Susan So examined Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney's recent visit to China in a new policy brief. They underscore that Carney's efforts to strengthen strategic ties with the People's Republic should strain U.S.-Canada relations and even jeopardize the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement ahead of its July renegotiation. By the way, Carney also went to Qatar to feed from the trough there, too. Makes you wonder what the hell is going on up there in the Great White North. I'm nauseated. All right. It's time to wrap up this episode like a giant Chipotle burrito. Yes, I am already thinking about lunch, even as I'm nauseated. If you're still hungry for knowledge after today's episode, I encourage you to go visit our website, follow our social media accounts for fascinating and informative content, and don't forget to make that very generous tax-deductible donation at fdd.org/invest. Tune in Friday for another extremely clever installment of your favorite morning show. Until then, I'm Jonathan Schanzer. As always, signing off for FDD.